Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the Infatuasian podcast. This is a show where we aim to celebrate and elevate Asian culture and creators. Thank you all out there for listening today. And guess what? We have an old friend back all the way from Oxford, Mississippi. We have our friend Sarah-Soonling Blackburn. Hey, Sarah.
Good to be back, Curtis.
What's new in the South?
It's very rainy. I don't know if that's new, but it is rainy.
I am actually looking out your window and it looks, kind of gloomy today.
Yeah, I know. I don't like it. But...
I know. Well, you're wearing long sleeves. Usually we record in summer and you're like in a tank top or a
I'm
t-shirt.
usually sweating.
Yeah.
It's your Deep South Correspondent over here.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I gotta start calling you that. Our Deep South Correspondent, Sarah-Soonling Blackburn. What else is new? What else is new for you?
Oh, just, we're recording this at the very end of the year, and I feel like every person and also all of the technology we use is just ready for the year to be over. So, computers keep crashing and restarting and Zoom meetings keep, just going offline, and that's okay. Yeah. We're all just going gently into 2025.
2025. Actually, I think this episode is coming out at the middle towards the end of January.
Okay.
So we're recording before Christmas, but we'll get to January soon enough. All right, and we have exciting guests today. We are talking to Dolly Lee. Dolly is an award-winning journalist and documentary filmmaker. She's the creator and director of the pop culture and history show Historian's Take on PBS Origins. She produced a series called Chinese Food and All American Cuisine for Al Jazeera. And then just this year, she was the finale episode of Out There, which is a show kind of about paranormal things. And her episode was on the Ghosts of Chinatown, available on Hulu. So welcome to the show, Dolly.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me.
Nice to have you here. Gotta ask, where did you get the name Dolly from?
So it's a slightly longer story than you would think.
Okay.
My family I'm from New York originally, and my dad immigrated to New York in the 80s from southern China. And my dad, to this day, doesn't speak English, but he and my mom are having an American kid, me. I was their first kid. And my dad really wanted me to have an American name. But he really loved this concept in Cantonese, Dai Kat Dai Lei. Dai Kat Dai Lei means big money, that's Dai Kat, and then Dai Lei means big luck. And my dad always thought it was more important to have more luck rather than money. So he wanted my name to embody this concept, Dai Lei. And so he asked his bilingual friend, what sounds like this or like feels like this. And his bilingual friend was like, well, what about the name Dolly? It's an American girl's name. There's a famous singer named Dolly, and it kind of sounds like Dai Lei. So that's how I ended up with Dolly.
Yeah, I love that story.
That's an amazing story. We are expecting a baby girl in end of March or early April, and have been trying to think about what names would capture both, the American world that we live in, but also my Chinese background and heritage. And I just love hearing that story. So if there's another
I have a
Dolly
birthday at the end of March.
No kidding. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe there'll be
that's so exciting.
There might be another
Congratulations,
Dolly
Sarah.
out there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That would fit in the South for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
It actually was on the short list. So,
oh my God.
Really?
Yes.
Right.
I think old fashioned names are coming back.
Very much so.
I have not met. The only Dollys I've ever met are like women in the South, grandmas in the South who are over the age of 75, and then me.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet you get all the usernames you want. DollyLee.com is available for you. All the usernames.
Yes.
All right, and we like to greet our guests in the Asian way. So, Dolly, Sik Fa Mea.
Yes, I have eaten sikjofan. Had some oatmeal, so that's close enough to rest.
Yeah, no, that'll get you through till dinner. Sarah, we didn't ask you. Wait, what is it? What time is it over there? 4 in the afternoon?
4 o'clock, so it's in that in between. But I did have a shrimp po' boy for lunch. So
that sounds so good.
That was pretty good.
Still working on that sandwich. Yeah, good. Hey, let's talk about your journey, Dolly, a little bit. So your dad's from southern China, Guangzhou area or Guangdong province.
Mm-hmm.
How about your mom?
They're from the same town. They're from the same town in the Guangdong province.
Okay.
Yeah, so they met. They met when my mom was working at a candy factory.
Oh, what city is it?
The city it's a small city, so even a lot of Chinese people don't know it. It's called Xiuguan in Cantonese, Shaoguan in Mandarin.
Xiuguan.
Yeah, it's a really cool place. I've been quite a bit, to see my family there and to visit with my parents, and it's very preserved in the ways that it used to be. Of course, like change affects all of China, but even when we went as kids, there weren't that many cars in this town. It was mostly like motorcycle pedicabs and no traffic lights. And somehow in the span of just my own lifetime, they got
crazy.
streets and cars.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. Southern China is, they have the big city with 10 million people, but then like 2 miles out, it's, toilets over a ditch and stuff. Right. Like it really depends.
Yes.
Yeah. Very cool. So you grew up on the East Coast as a kid?
Yes. I grew up in Brooklyn.
Was there anything in your youth that said, hey, you're going to be a documentary filmmaker?
I actually I pursued art for pretty much all of my life, all of my career, visual arts. My dad was also an artist, so he taught me how to draw. So I've always been captivated by people and stories. My dad was such a good portrait artist, and that's what I also love. Portraiture, people, the study of faces. And that's actually how I started in journalism. I was a news illustrator.
Oh, illustrator. Like for print.
For web, for digital.
Okay,
I started at Al Jazeera in the digital space, doing a lot of illustrations for news. Anything ranging from like infographics or like portraying people who we may not have the rights to use their image, but we could do a recreation, or for stories where people didn't want to be on camera, due to trauma or security reasons or needing to hide their identity. So even in the earliest days, it was a combination of like art and storytelling and just like an obsession with understanding people at a deeper level.
When did you make that switch over then into being the storyteller yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question, because working in news as an illustrator, you're so inundated in the world of story. But news documentary and like film documentary are quite different, right? News documentary has a real purpose of delivering information without too much artistic interpretation, right? That's the definition of journalism. You're not supposed to really interpret what you're seeing. You're supposed to just give that information.
Right.
So in the beginning, I was doing a lot of like these illustrations, and naturally working at Al Jazeera, which is such a video heavy organization, they were like, great, now make it move. And I was like, I never learned that in art school. I never learned how to make these pictures move. And I was so lucky and blessed to be working with such incredible producers at Al Jazeera and a really talented motion graphics artist. So my very first videos was a collaboration with a motion graphics artist where she essentially held my hand. This is now one of my best friends, Marissa Cruz. She like held my hand through the process of learning the mechanism of motion, where she was like, okay, this is how you storyboard for me so that I can create these transitions. And that's where I started learning about like, how do you go from scene to scene? What do you need to create? What are the things that can take people in and out of a scene? How do you use motion for the story rather than just showing a still image? And so my very first video ever is an all illustrated piece about this woman's experience in solitary confinement in an upstate prison in New York. And it was just, I was just hooked. I felt like as an artist, it was a whole new tool that was introduced into my repertoire.
Yeah.
Dolly, I first came across your work by seeing one of your Al Jazeera shorts about the Mississippi Delta Chinese.
Oh, awesome.
And I used to do workshops and trainings for educators who were coming to this region of the country who didn't know much about it and would use that in training people because it helped to illustrate just the diversity of the region. So when Curtis said that he was going to be interviewing you, I was like, yes, I have to be there. I think that this is so
you
cool.
You just elevated my heart rate and gave me all types of like warmth throughout my body. I'm all, when you make work, especially for a news doc, you put out your work into the world and there's no like film festival element to it. You don't get an audience, right?
Yeah.
And so I just make something, it publishes, and I move on to the next thing. And it's like I put things into a black hole and I don't know what happens afterwards. And to hear, every single time I hear someone use any of these pieces to share with the community, to like bring more conversation to this part of the world, I'm just so honored. So thank you.
Well, thank you, because I think something so beautiful about it is that these are stories that, unless you experience it firsthand, very, very few people know that they happened or that these communities exist. And so a question for you is, what made you fall in love with, want to tell these Asian American, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander stories?
Yes. So, I've always been gravitated to stories about people who are misunderstood in this world, like being from Brooklyn, growing up in the Marble Projects. I feel that even my own background as someone who's Chinese American from a certain community in Brooklyn, certainly not Williamsburg, I don't even see my own story represented that well. And, even working in a newsroom, I remember working with a few other producers on a story about EBT, about food stamps. And I realized I was the only person in the group that had actually used food stamps growing up. And I was like, there are so many stories that were being told from these, these outsider perspectives. And one thing that Al Jazeera, especially AJ Plus, was working with as my first job in journalism, they were so great at telling stories, especially in 2014. This is the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, when everything was happening in Missouri and Ferguson. And I was just so blown away by the depth of our coverage, the nuance. I learned so much covering mostly, the prison reform system, the history of Black incarceration, and the early Black Lives Matter movement, that I was just really inspired. I was inspired by how powerful the Black American community was in the way that they organize and in, the radical history of its activists. And that honestly got me curious about what was the history of Asian Americans, because, I think in California, and by then I was working out of Oakland. I was in Oakland working for Al Jazeera in the Bay Area. And California, as an East Coaster, I've noticed that California is so good about teaching the history of other communities and minorities that even in, New York, you would think, Brooklyn, progressive, diverse place, there's not that much emphasis on knowing the history of other groups. And so California was a really eye-opening experience for me in terms of just seeing, like, understanding the Black Panther movement, right? Knowing that was like right here in Oakland, knowing that was in California, and learning so much about like the Asian American history that happened in California, in San Francisco. That was really what got me so inspired, because I realized that there was so much I didn't know. And really that started from learning more about the Black American community in the US. And so I became very interested in finding more stories, and specifically with the Mississippi Delta community, post the 2016 election, which our newsroom covered in close proximity, just like every, elite liberal newsroom in 2016. And we were all blindsided because of, our ignorance of the South, truthfully, and the rest of America. And I had gone to college in Texas. I went to Rice, and it was like the biggest culture shock I had ever experienced. And it made me realize that there were Asian people in the South, and it seems so simple, right? Of course there are Asian people in the South, right? Of course. Yet that was just so mind-blowing to me. And, when you grow up in New York, you really think you're at the center of the universe and that everything revolves around you. And when I, had that veil lifted, when I was living in Houston and just experiencing all the culture, community, and art there, it's always just stuck with me. And so after 2016 election, feeling so inspired by the coverage that we were doing of, the Black American community, and knowing that this overlooking of the South was one of the biggest issues in media, I was just hell-bent on telling a story that was from the South that could bring this like intersectional but also interracial lens. Why is it so crazy that people in the South speak with a Southern accent, right? Like conceptually, it shouldn't be crazy.
Right.
And yet it is one of the very first people I met when I moved to the Deep South, to the Mississippi Delta, was a Chinese American man whose family story is very much like the ones that you highlight in that. And I was so taken aback. Like the thickest Southern accent I had ever heard in my life up until this point, coming out of a man who looks like my uncle offering me a Bud Light.
Yes.
Like, what is what is happening here?
Yes.
Frida's family store in Minsang started out in the 1930s as two different buildings across the street from each other. One serving Black people, the other serving white people. Neither Black nor white, the Chinese community found themselves in the middle.
It was like a 3-lane road. There were the whites and the Blacks and the Chinese. We all stayed in our lanes and we were fine until we crossed over.
The Chinese grocers depended on the Black community for business and also served them in very practical ways. Like when Jean's father's customers couldn't pay for their groceries right away, he let them use credit.
People didn't have that much cash, and so he would have credit, and they would come in 1 week, pay a little bit on their bill, and then take out more. And that was just kind of how they survived.
This kind of trust was essential because of the economic burden non-whites faced. Where Jean grew up,
but as you were telling the story, I think it is so, even your journey to wanting to tell these stories it's like something we often talk about is how you can't tell the story, the true history, the true stories of Asian America or Chinese America without the histories and stories of Black America as well. And even in sort of your journey through journalism and storytelling, that is a piece of the process too, that all of our histories are intertwined with each other. I think shows up a lot in the approach to your work. It's not, even though you're focusing in on maybe one community or one story, it is a way of illustrating maybe a broader system for people to be able to take in and relate to and understand.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And you find the common denominator of Chinese food. I mean, like, who doesn't like Chinese food, right? So it's a 3-part series, and you start here in San Francisco, which was pretty cool because that's kind of, if you're going to talk about Chinese American history, you got to start here in San Francisco. Yes. And it's called, what is it called? Chop suey, the dish that saved. What's the title of that one?
The how chop suey saved San Francisco's Chinatown. Yeah. And, Curtis, it's funny that you mentioned the food element of it because I had pitched a series for years at Al Jazeera. It was so difficult to get done. Partially, I was young, right? I was like in my mid-20s as someone who didn't go to journalism school. I came out of art school, right? So I was like, we should do this series. We should really cover the Chinese community. I think people would really find it so fascinating. There's so little coverage of it. And I was told again and again that the topic was too niche. And this is, the early learnings of how do you pitch a story too, because in my mind, what I had actually pitched was a 3-part series about urban, suburban, and rural Chinese communities. And the editors came back and they're like, that is the most unsexy pitch I have ever heard. Like, what? This is not an anthropological study. What is the visual element of this? Come rethink it, repackage it, and come back with something a bit more appealing. And so the food aspect was actually a slight afterthought, like the ribbon on top, to really get this story made, which did end up being an urban, suburban, rural 3-part series, because I thought it was critical to look at this community from these different geographical points of views.
Yeah.
But the food part, I think when you really dissect it, you notice it's slightly tacked on to everything else that's happening.
But it gets you to click on it, so that's good.
Exactly. And that was an important lesson to be learned. I grumbled as I rewrote the pitch many times, but it takes a collaboration.
Yeah, for sure. But then I feel like maybe you got your pitching down a little better, because you were able to go to PBS and pitch a couple different series. Let's see, which one comes first? Is People's History of Asian America? Was that first? Okay, that's on PBS Voices. What was your pitch for that series?
This was a very fraught time in the US when this series came about. I think it came out in 2021, and this was right after the Atlanta spa shootings had happened. And I would say every network at that point was scrambling to cover the AAPI community properly, because there's so much talk, of course, and coverage around, the Stop Asian Hate movement. There was a lot of conversation around what is the history of AAPI? Why is this community targeted? Why is this not new? And so everyone was scrambling after the Atlanta spa shootings to do some type of coverage. And my mentors and partners over at the Center for Asian American Media, CAAM, they had approached me because PBS wanted to do something, and they're like, we don't know that many people can actually pull this off in a very short period of time, like a fully thought out original digital series that addresses this topic. And they're like, do you think you could take this on? And I was like, man, this timeline is so tight. It is still COVID. So, this is early vaccine days. A lot of people still weren't vaccinated. I was like, this is going to be really, really tough.
Yeah.
But I felt such a need to do something. And there was an opportunity to do something for PBS, right? PBS means so much to American media.
Yeah.
And so I called up a buddy, my friend Adrian De Leon, who was the co-host of the show. Adrian is a professor of Asian American history back then at USC. Now he's at NYU. And I was like, Adrian, we got to put our heads together and do something here. Send me all of your syllabus for your classes and let me see if I can package this in the right way. And that's how we ended up with the People's History of Asian America.
Love it. And here's some of the titles, just a couple of them. Origins of Asian Fetish, AAPI, APA, APIDA, or Asian American, and talking about what we call ourselves. The Long History of the China Virus. I mean, right? That was timely on that one. Can we watch one of these together?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay. Which one would you like to kind of give us maybe behind the scenes or...
I think the what do we call ourselves one, I think that really stands the test of time. It's one of the most utilized videos in terms of having discussions during AANHPI month. And it's also it was the most fun since, we basically brought a few different Asian Americans into studio and we're like, all right, you identify this acronym.
Okay, let's watch a little bit of this here.
It is AANHPI Heritage Month, officially declared so by President Biden just in time for May 2021.
Yes, it is a mouthful and includes a huge range of people who can trace their ancestry to one giant continent of over 40 different countries.
And about 25,000 islands in the Pacific Ocean.
It's a lot, and the name for this month has changed quite a few times since it was first signed into law by Jimmy Carter back in 1978.
So this really begs the question, who gets to be Asian American? And why is it so hard for us to find an identity or acronym to share?
Do I think the term Asian American includes me? Yes. I'm kind of torn with that one.
I feel like it mixes race with citizenship or nationality. If I do choose to be a Japanese citizen, does that mean I'm no longer Asian American?
I don't gravitate towards that term first. I tend to gravitate towards Filipino American first.
Prof, do you consider yourself Asian American?
Got any behind the scenes on this one?
Yes, largely because we filmed during COVID.
You're right.
That studio that we're in is actually in a post-production house called Flash Cuts here in Los Angeles. Flash Cuts they're like this hidden legacy post house that has cut and finished and helped produce so many Asian American films and documentaries. The big PBS Asian American series, a 5-part series, was finished, post-produced at Flash Cuts. Flash Cuts was started by this really cool man, Walt Louie, who let me have one of the offices in their post house during COVID, because he's like, well, no one's there, do whatever you want. And I was like,
Cool.
is it cool if I film? And he's like, do whatever you want. And
Nice.
thanks to Flash Cuts, we're able to have that space and like made this place look really beautiful too.
Yeah.
So there's so much like behind the scenes in terms of like thinking, like how do you achieve something? How to keep the team small for COVID issues and keep the costs minimal as well. Because you need to do things really quickly and move really fast.
Yeah.
So thank God for Flash Cuts. And to this day, I still do most of my posts with them.
That's good to know. Yeah, that's kind of cool. That's a cool inside story on that. Well, what was your thinking on that episode? What were you trying to achieve with that?
You know, for digital shows, I mean, depending on what the purpose is, right? This one, it was for PBS, which I knew had to be like broad reaching, educational. And what I like to call this like optimizing for like high utility information. High utility information means that it's like really shareable, but also like a question that people keep asking that is difficult to answer. And sometimes people get frustrated with answering. So it's just easier if you're able to create something that either helps people, you know, send an answer out to like a friend or family that they were, you know, having a discussion with, or it leads to a bigger conversation because now they have more information. And so the figuring out how do Asian Americans refer to themselves was a huge conversation, especially during AAPI month in 2021, because it's part of how do you build solidarity, right? Like how do you build a movement if you have difficulty identifying yourselves? And the complications of adding more and more acronyms, you know, it's like this almost like catch-22 of like when diversity is so inclusive that it becomes exclusive and it like goes a full 360. And I could see that was happening among the Asian American community, right? And like talking about the original origins of like, where does this term Asian American even come from? I thought was really critical as, you know, Native Hawaiians get lumped into like Asian American. Like, what does that mean? Why are Islanders lumped into this identity? So this to me was really high utility information, something that will always come up and something that needs to be addressed. And there needs to be a productive way to talk about it.
Yeah, that's cool.
What kind of feedback do you get from like people who've seen it? Do you ever hear from somebody who's like just stumbled across one of these and learned something new and wants to share?
Most of the time, it's positive. Most of the time, you know, I hear from people when they're like, I'm using this. You know, I've even heard people using it in like a corporate setting, right? Like at a Google or a startup or a tech company that does, you know, like heritage history events for their employees, right? They're like, we're using this for a NHPI like brown bag lunch. And I was like, awesome. You know, these are all like, this is the purpose of the work, right? And then every now and then I'll hear from people, you know, and usually these are like very ranty emails where people just get really upset about, and you can just name it, right? They're just upset for all kinds of reasons. And they, you know, get particularly aggravated that PBS would want to talk about like Asian Americans or like the origins of Asian fetish or like the China virus, right? And you know, also as someone who was like new to working with PBS, I knew that for their digital studios, I was like, you guys should push the envelope and try some subjects and topics that are a bit more on the edge and may get people a bit more riled up because you guys could use a little fire.
Yeah. Now, there's definitely some cool episodes here. We don't have time to go through them all, but there's one in your other series, which is a Historian's Take on PBS. What is an Asian himbo? Dolly, you want to define what an Asian himbo is?
This is a great episode too. I have to credit Adrian, my collaborator on the PBS People's History Show, for coming up with this episode in particular. It's so funny because himbo is such a hilarious word. And I guess the way you can define an Asian himbo, it's a caricature, right? It's usually like a movie or like a book caricature. It's an archetype, and the archetype is something that it's a character, it's an unexpected character because historically Asian male characters are portrayed in a very derogatory way.
Yeah.
And the Asian himbo is usually like a very sexified Asian male character. Right. But he has to have some flaw, and the flaw is that he is just dumb as bricks. And so it's really like an evolution of the Asian male caricature on television. Like, the contemporary Asian man, you know, may not be buck-toothed and like incoherent, but he can't be sexy. He just has to be stupid too.
And right at the center is the poster child for this is my guy Manny Jacinto.
Yes.
Sarah, you're a Star Wars fan, aren't you? A little bit of a,
you know, enough.
Okay, but yeah, in the Acolyte, you know, he was one of the main characters in there, and abs on abs, and they called him Darth Triceps, I think. But yeah, it's a fun stereotype. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Positive or negative? What's the take home on that? Is the himbo phenomenon a positive or negative? What do you think?
You know, it's funny. To jump in there, I've done some work with various high school groups over the years, and it is almost aspirational for some young Asian American boys to want to become the himbo because it is better than the previous stereotype, even though it is still a stereotype. It's still a caricature. But I've met plenty of like 15, 16-year-old Asian boys who are just in the gym all day trying to get that body and like really suppressing their grades. And at first I was so confused, but then you realize, oh, this is like a true phenomenon that's happening.
Yeah. Well, and if you guys follow K-pop or K-dramas at all, it's definitely a thing where there's some fetishization of Asian males as well going on now. And you know what? I'll take that over the opposite.
How do you feel about that, Curtis? Really, we should be asking you.
I'll take it. Yeah, I'll take it. You know, why not? But hopefully they realize that it is a stereotype and there's more to us than just abs and triceps. But
I think that Asian American culture and identity really deserves multiplicity.
Sure.
We deserve to have an Asian himbo stereotype that we can own.
Yes.
We deserve, we should have our versions of reality TV. We should have all of the things that make other people whole, human, and complex. And I think that though the stereotype to me is not like, it's not ideal to be thought of as stupid, right?
Right.
But I think that when you look at how progress is made, sometimes just introducing the possibility of a different existence is what makes people see Asian Americans as more real and more human. And I know it seems kind of like contradictory because it's dehumanizing, but it just adds more dimensionality.
Agreed.
Well, it's better than the alternative, which is to be completely invisible. And, thinking about the surveys of Americans, asking them to name a famous Asian American, and the number one answer being, I don't know, year after year after year.
Yeah.
And that feels much worse because then any kind of really old stereotype can just fill in those spaces instead.
Yeah. I was talking to some people who were about Asian sitcoms, and we were talking about some that we didn't really like, and it mixed in with the ones that we loved. But we were kind of like, hey, well, at least we got crappy sitcoms too. We made it in the world. We have terrible movies and sitcoms that we don't really like, but hey, it's better than being invisible. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, we need an Asian Jersey Shore.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was that? Bling Empire? Wasn't that kind of that was
Kind of.
it's kind of a stupid show, but at the same time, I was like, hey, you know what?
I think
got
it
some
still furthers the cause in the long run.
There are some, yeah, 100%, yeah. All right. Well, that brings us to your latest work. Well, that I know about the latest work is your Hulu show, which is called Out There. What's the full title of Out There? It's Out There, the Paranormal
Crimes
Stories.
of the Paranormal.
Crimes of the Paranormal. And your episode number 8, you're the ultimate episode, which is talking about Ghosts of Chinatown with our, she's not really a friend, but I know Cynthia Yee. She does that Ghosts of Chinatown walking tour. She's been doing that forever. And
That's
she's
cool.
kind of
It's cool that you know her.
yeah, she's a character of Chinatown for sure. But she came and told you some stories. Now, actually, full disclosure, I haven't watched it yet. But what can
I
you?
have.
Yeah, Sarah did. So, what can you tell us about it, Sarah?
Oh, I really enjoyed it. And I would love to hear Dolly share what brought her to this particular story, because it is, I was thinking they would be like, oh, fully just, people ghost searching and doing the ectoplasm or whatever. But it actually is a very complete story of community and history and, transcontinental passage of people. Yeah. And I'd love to hear your perspective.
Thank you for watching it. I don't want to give away too much of the episode because it's there's a lot of surprises, and the story was so difficult to do. It was so difficult. When I look back on like 10 years of being a journalist and documentarian, I just could not have done this story at any earlier point in my career. Part of it is like the people I had to call to figure out who the right sources were to get subjects to speak to me. The show overall, Out There, it is about true crime. It's an anthology series, so every episode is different. So they're standalone. You don't have to watch all 8 to understand the full story. Each episode focuses on a different monster or cryptid. Ghosts, Bigfoot, witches, aliens. So every single one is a true story, a documentary that intersects with some kind of monster or mythology. But they're about real situations that happen to people. Yeah. And so the show itself is not like terribly spooky. There's like a spooky aura and vibe, but it is definitely more in the true crime space. And as you can imagine, when a crime happens to any community, they either, they can feel a lot of shame and fear around it. And having interviewed so many Chinese people, Asian people over the years, especially older Asian people, they are so difficult to get to talk on camera. Yeah. And there's a huge element in the story that makes it really difficult for people to speak up. So even finding the subjects for this film took a very, very long time. And it's also super taboo. Like there is an element of religion and spirituality that makes people scared. For people who don't know, like ghosts and ghost culture is so big in Southern Chinese community and Southern Chinese beliefs. After Al Jazeera, I actually moved to Hong Kong and I worked for the South China Morning Post. And during that time, I was based in Hong Kong, and I knew that Hong Kong was really into ghost culture. Yeah. But I didn't know how real it was until like my first Hungry Ghost Month. When I was out there, and it was so real. The city, just everywhere you go, there were just like piles and piles of like incense and like joss paper just burning in the streets so that you can ward off ghosts. Nobody's hanging their clothes outside because they're worried ghosts will get trapped in their clothes. A lot of people don't go out at night for fear of getting haunted. And it's like deeply religious. It's a Taoist ritual. You see a Taoist ritual in the episode itself. The ritual that you see is actually the opening of the gates of hell on the first day of Hungry Ghost Month. It's a holiday, quote unquote holiday, that lasts 30 days where the gates of hell are open. And during those 30 days, the the dead can roam among the living.
Go back and forth, yeah.
It was something really special about that episode is how gently, respectfully, or seriously the religion was taken. My family's also Southern Chinese, we're Teochew. My family's mostly in Malaysia, and so I remember growing up with the hungry ghosts and just ghosts in general in life. And then as I've gotten older and have been living in the States most of my adult life, I've almost tried to like shut that side down because it is scoffed at. It's just like superstition or silly or whatever. And then you get to the point where you realize this is so ingrained just through like who we grow up around or how we are raised. And I think something that shows up in this storytelling is it takes these beliefs really seriously and doesn't, there's a few people who are like, you could call it superstition, but actually more often it is described as religion.
Right.
And without taking it seriously, the true crime aspect doesn't work. It doesn't make sense at all.
It doesn't make sense. And, there's, of course, the story is very investigative, right? So it really like fits my own background working as a journalist, but you need so much cultural nuance to really understand the belief, right? You have to believe the monster or the ghost or the cryptid, or else the crime doesn't make sense. So, and a Chinese ghost is not like an American ghost. They're so different. So there's so many elements of explaining that you have to do, which also made this episode so difficult, right? When you're explaining multiple layers of culture, and then you're also explaining religion, and then you also have another language, and then you also are working with a bigger system, right? Like Hulu is Disney, and Disney's lawyers are so strict.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You might be over-explaining at one point, not explaining enough, and just by missing a little bit, you might not understand the full story. But the premise of it, of this episode, hinges on this phenomenon called ghost marriages. And ghost marriages are a real thing that a lot of Chinese people and Malaysian Chinese people, Taiwanese people will do when someone, like a young person, passed away without getting married. They'll marry them in the afterlife so that they have an ancestral home to go to and won't become a ghost. And it's not practiced actively as much anymore, but it's become like a spiritual thing that people do. Like during China's one-child policy, there were a lot of ghost marriages that took place because there were so many abortions happening.
Right.
And a way for women to, not so much that they believe that a fetus is a human, but for women to just let go and like be able to move on from the idea that like they can never have a second kid.
Wow.
That was like a ritual that was performed so that they can let go of what happened to them.
Well, guess what? We're bumping against the clock a little bit, and we don't have time to go into everything, but we're just scratching the surface. But everyone out there can go check out Dolly's work. You have a lot of it archived at dollylee.com or linked up at dollylee.com. That's where I found a lot of your things. You have a YouTube channel as well. People can check that out. Or go check out Dolly's Instagram, which is @ByDollyLee. And go watch this episode of the Chinese ghost story on Hulu, wherever you get Hulu. But guess what? We're not done yet. We have one more thing. We like to close on the lightning round, kind of lighten things up a little bit. Let's see. Sarah, you got it in front of you? You want to do question number one?
Absolutely. All right, Dolly. You had to pick one place to live for the rest of your life. Would you pick Brooklyn, San Francisco, LA, I'll throw in Hong Kong, or lovely Mississippi?
Lovely Mississippi.
I love all those places. I am extremely loyal to New York, and Brooklyn till I die.
Fair enough. All right, you had a series on Chinese food or Chinese cuisine. What would be your death row last meal if you had to choose one last meal?
Spaghetti and meatballs.
Really?
I know, it's not a Chinese meal.
That's your comfort food, though, huh?
I am from Brooklyn.
The Brooklyn, yeah.
That's great.
Okay. Fair enough.
Who is your bucket list interview?
I this is kind of a joke, but I've always wanted to interview Dolly Parton, a Dolly on Dolly story.
Yeah, that makes sense.
To me, it would be like the great joining of American forces.
Two Dollys in one place. What are the chances?
It's like the sheep, right? Because cloning Dollies here.
Oh, Dolly the sheep. Yeah. That's right. All right. Now, it doesn't have to be a himbo per se. But who's your favorite himbo or Asian male sex symbol?
I was thinking about this, and I have to say the career trajectory of Manny Jacinto, who you mentioned before, has been so astounding to me, because when we made that himbo video, he was actually only a himbo in his characters. And now he's been cast in these much more complex and dark roles. And I think this is exactly what we had all hoped for, that on the path of himbo-ship, you end up
the growth, the arc. Yeah.
Yes, you end up with a role that is complex and nuanced and fascinating. So my vote goes to Manny Jacinto. I'm excited for where his career goes.
I'd be happy if he got a lot more roles. Yeah, for sure. And we like to end with our signature question. We ask our guests who their infatuasian is. Infatuasian is anyone in the Asian community that you admire, living or deceased. So, Dolly Lee, who is your infatuasian?
My infatuation is Michelle Kwan. She is someone I would love to do a documentary about. I find her so fascinating. And I also think expatriating to another country. She lives in Belize now and is like an ambassador for them.
Oh, wow.
I think that is so brave and bold, especially because her whole life and career was here in the US.
Yeah.
So yeah, Michelle Kwan, I think there's so much to her that people don't know. And she hears this. Michelle, I would love to do a documentary about you.
All right. We'll tag her in the post.
We will be seated to watch it when that comes out.
No, yeah. You're not the first person to pick her. She's, as an athlete, amazing. But more than that now, just her second life. Wow, I didn't even know that about her. That's cool. That's cool. Well, today you're our infatuasian, Dolly, so we are happy to have you on here. Thank you for all that you're doing, all the stories that you're telling. What's on tap for you? You got anything new in the works?
Yes, my next documentary is going to be about someone you might know, Curtis. My next documentary is about the PBS chef, Martin Yan.
Yes.
On the show Yan Can Cook.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And he's basically like the Asian Julia Child.
100%.
Somehow there is no documentary out there about Martin Yan, which blows my mind.
Yeah.
And I knew his documentary needs to be made. It's going to be made at some point or another. And I felt it was really important to take that on and capture his story in a nuanced way. So very excited for that to come out.
But you filmed it already?
We filmed a good portion of it. We'll be going into production next year. So, film does take some time. So we're hoping 2026 we'll be able to see it.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, no, he's a local hero, but more than local. I mean, he's international.
I watched with my grandmother in Malaysia. I would watch Yan Can Cook.
Yeah.
He is a global icon.
Yeah, but also Bay Area icon. So
yes.
So yeah, we love him out here. UC Davis graduate. That's my alma mater as well. So yeah, cool. Dolly, are you going to be coming to the Bay Area more often?
Yes, I'll be in the Bay Area. I've been up a few times this year to film with Martin, and we'll definitely be back. His story is just so incredible. So I'm excited for people to see the man behind Yan Can Cook.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you're in the Bay Area, give us a call. Well, Sarah will fly out. I'll fly you in my private jet, Sarah.
That's right.
But yeah, let's grab some food in Chinatown next time you're in town.
Would love that.
All right. And you could bring Martin. You could bring Martin along if you want.
Oh, if he's there, I'm coming.
He would love it.
Yeah. And who knows? Maybe I'll bring a microphone. You never know. Oh, great pick. Well, we'll tag Manny Jacinto. We'll also tag, who else are we tagging? We're tagging Martin Yan and Michelle Kwan. All right, we'll tag all these heroes in our post. And, they're all welcome on the podcast. Any of you out there listening, welcome to the podcast. But, Dolly, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me.
Yeah. And Sarah,
yes.
Don't be a stranger.
Of
Come
course.
on more often.
Always good to be here. Thanks for letting me co-host again, Curtis. And
Of
so
course.
good to learn from you, Dolly.
Thank you.
All right. So everyone out there, you know where to follow Dolly. I gave those things earlier, but I'll put that in the show notes. And you can follow us at Infatuasian Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, and write us an old-fashioned email at infatuasianpodcast@gmail.com. And thank you, listeners, for listening out there. Hope you heard some new things today and learned some things. We love telling these stories and talking to creators, and so we're glad that you're here to hear them. And so let's see, on behalf of Sarah, Dolly, and myself, we hope that you're all happy, healthy, and safe out there. We'll talk to you again soon, everyone. Bye.
Bye.